So, Brian, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Brian Chupp. I am currently a clinical assistant professor for Purdue University in the Daniel School of Business in the Department of Organizational Behavior, Human Resources. Been here for about 10 years. And before that, and how I know Joe, I spent about 20 some years as an HR practitioner for various organizations. And so a little bit unique compared to a lot of folks in academia, and that I kind of I have one foot into scholar academia and one foot into practitioner. But when I talk to folks, I always tell them I'm a practitioner at heart. So I obviously research new information, especially the stuff that's going on with technology and AI. That's cutting edge, innovative stuff. But there's got to be somebody that kind of can help translate the research and the research findings into what is practical, what is realistic for people who are actually doing the job.
Absolutely. Well, boiler up, right?
Yes.
First of all.
Yeah. Hey, we have a chance. Again, it's been 44 years since we've hit the Final Four. So hopefully we'll hit these next two wins.
This is the year.
Yes. Hopefully.
All right. Well, so let's set the stage a little bit and kind of talk about the landscape, right? So, technology is ever increasing, right? We are always finding new and creative uses for existing technologies, and we're always developing new technologies. So the kind of standard robotics that we've seen in the past is getting better and better and better, and it's getting less and less expensive all the time. And that opens up a lot of new markets for folks that provide and design automated systems like myself to come in and automate systems that in the past, no, this isn't worth automating. Today, they are worth automating. And alongside of that, we've developed a lot of new technology, especially around AI in the last couple of years. That's really coming into jobs as well. So either in some cases replacing them, in other cases, and in a lot of cases, augmenting them heavily, right? Mm-hmm. And is this kind of what you're seeing out there too, or are there some other like scenarios that you're noticing?
Yeah, obviously, a lot of what gets talked about is the juicy information. Every conference I go to, every conversation I have, every conversations like this, when people ask me my opinion, but just talking to my colleagues, the number one question is this going to eliminate jobs? I mean, it's the what's in it for me or how it's going to affect me. That's what especially employees want to know. And but how I see it, and a lot of the people I talk to, that's not really even the right question to ask. But I understand why employees do that because, again, job security, we have bills to pay and so forth. But for organizations who know what they're doing, the question isn't this going to replace, is how are we going to use it? And a question that I think should be talked about, but I haven't really seen a lot of conversations about this, is how are we going to utilize this? Or what's going to happen is, let's just say, I think a common number out there is, it's going to improve productivity, efficiency by 20%. Let's just throw a number out there just so we can have a number to talk about. And so, again, human nature is, oh my gosh, are we going to cut labor by 20%? And a lot of the organization leaders that I hear are saying, oh, no. So that's to be determined. I mean, when they start seeing some profit signs or the stockholders get involved, but a lot of it's going to be, well, how are you going to utilize it to get us to that, like save us that 20% productivity and so forth? But the key is, how are we going to reinvest that 20%? And again, let's just use a regular 40-hour work week. So let's make it very practical. I mean, that's a day. So how are we going to reinvest 8 hours, 10 hours of work? And what are we going to do? And I think that is the big question that organizations need to make, or to think about and to make, is, okay, if philosophically we don't want to necessarily just cut labor, how are you going to do it? And my concern, because again, I've had some conversations when I go to these conferences and you have all these, I mean, you hear about IBM and you hear about all these other folks who are cutting edge of doing all this stuff. And I think what's not getting discussed is, okay, how are you going to use those 8 hours? How are you going to use those 10 hours? We're assuming, one, that organizations know it. They don't understand it. I mean, even in HR, one of the things that we always talked about, I mean, we've always fought for the seat at the table, figured we need to be in the decision room, HR. And so over the last several decades, we've gone from transactional to transformational. And so we love to talk. I teach that and I talk about it. We want to be more strategic versus tactical. But when the rubber meets the road, what does that look like in an 8-hour day? What do we mean by transformational? And in fact, I was at a company, Purdue was doing some consulting with a company, and I was there, and somebody mentioned, oh yeah, we're going to be able to do all these higher level jobs. Our HR folks are going to be able to do these higher level jobs. And I'm like, what would that be? What do you mean? What would that look like? Well, you know, and that's the conversation that we have. And so,
what is the higher level thing?
What is the higher level? And so, the other thing that I'm hearing is that, at least in the next several years, I mean, it's going to take several years for organizations, from an organization wide, from a very formal perspective, to roll out this technology and AI. It sounds like the impact of especially the impact of Gen AI is going to be more kind of individual at its pace. And so if organizations don't know how to use those 8 hours, how do we expect our employees to figure it out on their own? Because it sounds like most people, how their job is going to be affected is again what they call the co-pilot. It depends on which organization you use. That's somebody that's going to help me out versus taking over. So again, we got to figure out what tasks are going to be taken over, but then what are the rest of the tasks that the human has to do, or that can be what was the word that you used? What was the word that you just used that AI is going to augment? Yeah, what's going to augment, right? Is going to help us out.
So it sounds like you're saying that, like, it's not going to take a whole job, right? It's going to take and change the nature of that job, and maybe like increase the productivity of some administrative tasks and stuff like that, right? But maybe we should be thoughtful about how do we use that, whatever we've saved, somewhere else. I think in a lot of cases, you're an industrial engineer, you pencil out something, and it's like, hey, look, we're going to save 8 hours. You still probably have that person there 5 days a week, right? You're not sending them home on Friday and then bringing them back for 4 days. So how do you take advantage of that, right?
Is that a question? Or did I interrupt your question?
It was only a half of a question mark. I'm
a professor. I love to talk, so I have to shut up sometimes.
Yeah. So what are kind of the steps to like, how can we be intentional about how we use that saved productivity, right? Like, everyone needs to go for it. If you don't automate, somebody else will, and they'll be more competitive than you. But so we've made that decision, right? I think as a society, let's automate and move forward so we can be as competitive as possible. But I don't think that, and to your point, maybe everybody's being as thoughtful as they should about what do you do now that you've automated and you have saved? Like, how do you get the most out of that activity?
Well, one of the things that I've been telling my students in the last couple of years, so one of the courses that I teach is talent acquisition. And I would say up until maybe a year or two ago, one of the common topics of staffing, talent acquisition, is job analysis and job design. And we kind of always chuckled about that because, okay, it's something we had to talk about, but really a lot of people don't have to do it that much.
Yeah.
I think that is going to be totally different. I think good organizations, so HR, i.e., whoever's involved in the job, designing the job and so forth, they're going to have to brush off those job analysis, job design textbooks or policies and procedures, And they're going to have to figure out how they do that because, again, we're assuming that we're just going to neatly chop off, and chop out or remove that 20%, 10%, and then we'll just add it to something else. It is not going to be that easy. So one of the let me kind of get a little academic here. So I teach talent management, and I think one of the philosophical questions that organizations have, especially probably your larger progressive organizations who have kind of higher level HR folks who like to think about this, is how do you define talent? So you talk about, talent's our competitive advantage, talent, da da da.
Yeah.
Well, there's kind of two ways that the literature speaks on how you define talent. One is more of the person or the job title. So when you think about who's our talent, Joe's very good. He's our talent. And so we say, hey, Joe's our talented person. We got to make sure we keep him. We've got to make him happy. We need to make sure his employee engagement is really high. Or it's a position. So if you're a high-end retailer, our customer service, our frontline customer service folks, those are our talent because that's what's going to give us that competitive advantage. So that's one way to think about it, but it's mostly people and the traits inside of the people and so forth, or the positions and the value it adds to the organization. The other way to think about it is coming from almost a pure skills perspective. And this is not a either or, it's a continuum. And for the most part, I think a lot of organizations, when they think of talent, they think of people, they think of positions and so forth. Here's our high potentials. Whenever you hear the word high potential, that typically is people. But the other one is characteristics, which is what is the knowledge, skills, and abilities. So I say KSAOs, but knowledge, skills, and abilities. This, I think, is going to be very important because when we look at these jobs, all the jobs, but definitely if an organization is going to have your organization come in and help them maybe make some more major changes, they've got to break down that job with the help of IE, with the help of IT, and so forth, and figure out what are the tasks, what are the responsibilities, and then what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And it's not going to be this clean cut. It's going to be messier than this. But then you figure out, okay, which of these tasks, roles, responsibilities, what of the knowledge, skills, and abilities is technology or AI going to be able to do on its own? Mm-hmm. What is it that we still need a human person, the worker involved with the technology helping us out, and which one would be most pure human? Yeah. That's going to be huge because then that's when you're going to figure out, okay, how much are we going to be able to remove? Because you're going to find that you probably will be able to eliminate some job titles. But it doesn't mean you're going to eliminate the person. It means that, or let me say this, you're not going to eliminate the head count. You might eliminate the person if they're not skilled or they're not experienced or they don't have the capability of being able to do the work. The old adage, I'm sure you've heard it 100 times, AI is not going to take your job. It's the person who works with AI that's going to take your job.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's so true. And I'm kind of getting off track. I'm a professor. I love to go on rabbit trails. But that's one of the things I talk to. I mean, when I go around and do some maybe public speaking at like associations, maybe not HR things, but more like, I don't know, at schools or social organizations. And I talk to the individual. I'm like, folks, I think what's going to set you apart is your ability to embrace and work with AI. And then I always bring up that phrase, hey, you're not going to get replaced by AI, you're going to get replaced by somebody. But I want to tie that back to, okay, if we learn some type of technology or we use it to augment us and we free up those 8 hours, human nature tells us that we're not necessarily going to look for those higher level. I know we've talked about Covey before in the past. I mean, I love Covey. And when you talk about that time management matrix, urgent and important, we love to live our world in the urgent and important, but we know that's burnout. when I hear people talking about, hey, we're going to be able to now do higher level things, I kind of think about, they think we're automatically going to go from that urgent, important to that not urgent, important tasks. And I'm telling you, if people would want to do that, they would already be doing it. And so it's not it's human nature to deal with urgency, right? And so I have a feeling the cynic in me says that if employees, and this is what I tell these individuals, you can't be this person. You've got to be proactive and find those important, non-urgent tasks, because they're going to fill up their day with probably with not urgent, and now they're going to think it's urgent tasks.
Yeah.
So my whole point is, it's organizations have to be able to break down a job and figure out what's going to be taken over,
Mhm.
what's going to be helped, and what is humans going to still do. And then, and again, you might eliminate positions, but where are you going to refocus or reinvest those hours? And it might not be 10 hours for this person. It might mean no hours for this person, but we have this new position that has these hours.
Yeah. So yeah, I think as folks that design automation and implement these kind of systems all the time, we do a pretty good job of telling folks what the new set of tasks are, but we don't do a whole lot of work in like, hey, this is what your old set of tasks were, and we've changed it all. Now there is a lot of investment, like I think it's an increasing amount into like continuation of operations and like change management, and when you do a really big project, how do you help folks? But I think you said something pretty interesting, and I want you to help me break it down a little bit. So you talked about job analysis and job design, and for those that like didn't go to HR school, like break that down for me. Like, what's the elevator pitch on these two things, and then how can like operations leaders and system designers leverage that or work that into our workflow?
Yeah. So a lot of people will use those terms interchangeably. How I think about it, they're very similar, but one kind of just logically goes before the other. If you think about it, before you design something, you got to figure it out. So,
Yep.
but and what I've seen in consulting or in teaching, um, I, I guess you could job design if you're starting from scratch. I guess you're just job designing. But what I tell students, or I tell other folks, I'm like, most of you are going to go into a situation where there's already some type of a job that's in existence. But you know that you could be more efficient. People are not interested. Later on, I can kind of get onto another rabbit trail on really there's kind of theoretically there's two things that we got to think about when we design jobs: the efficiency productivity aspect, and then the motivational aspect. But we'll keep the motivational for a little bit later here. But so we know that we want to change it, we have technology or whatever. So job analysis is basic, using different type of tools or different type of documents or whatever. uh, Again, depending on the industry, if manufacturing, a lot of times it's an industrial engineer or something like that. And they're going to break down that job into what are the major tasks, what are the major responsibilities. Kind of think of a job description, kind of creating a job description up for that job. And then, so that's job analysis. And then job design is, so you can almost think about it as you kind of tear it down, and then you're going to build it back up with the new technology or the new resources or whatever.
Okay.
And then creating your new in your world, creating your job age or your job flows,
Work instructions
work
and
instructions.
processes.
Yeah, yeah,
Love me a work instruction.
yes. And so where the, I guess, the intersection of your world versus my world is, you give my world those work instructions or the stuff, or we work together and figure out, okay, what does the ideal person need to be able to do this with knowledge, skills, experience, and so forth. And then that's how we kind of we put a job description together, and then we go try to attract and select the right people.
So I think a lot of times, like, when we're going through big design efforts, right, and we talk about, and there's a lot of industrial engineers at the table typically when you're designing automation, right, and everybody's very much focused on, like, let's build up this new task. Maybe we didn't do a lot of job analysis, and it is very agnostic of who that person was, what their skill set is, and all that stuff. But what I don't see very often is any HR partners, like, in that design process. So is that a thing that we can do? How could we incorporate that team into those designs, right, without going down rabbit trails, but, like, still making it work? Like, how would that look?
Joe, I love that question. I'm going to have to buy you dinner. Because
I love dinner too.
Not that many people ask that question. You have to get your HR people involved. If our people are our most important asset, if our competitive advantage, technology, because you think about it, technology is going to kind of even things up, right? People who might have resources, they might be able to get more technology, but it's the people, it's the talent that gives us the competitive advantage. Who's the people, for the most part, who's the people owner? What department, again, kind of deals with the people? That's HR. And we're not, and I'm getting on my soapbox here, we are not the social directors. We are not the police. We are not the Department of No. We are the Department of Human Capital. In fact, I think the title of human resources is probably going to go away. If you would have asked me 15 years ago, I thought for sure it was going to turn into something about human capital, but it took a little bit different approach. I think the word people is more used. But I could talk for hours about this. Everybody, all the research says, a lot of the CEOs say, all the senior leaders, what keeps us up at night is there going to be enough talented people? Is there going to be enough people that we can bring in? Can we fill our jobs? Can we reskill? Can we do all this stuff, which is people? And then the folks who kind of own that process isn't even brought into the situation. There's so many times we could help organizations stay away from mistakes by just getting us involved. I think the successful progressive organization is going to understand they have to bring their HR business partners into these conversations. Yes, there's going to be things that we're not going to, and when you get into the processes and so forth, but I would think you'd want finance people in there. You're going to want supply chain people in there. You want all those inputs. You and I, we know we've been in some situations where they didn't invite all the different types of people into the creation room, so to speak. And
it got spicy at the end there, yeah.
It got very spicy, and we had people come in and say, "Who created this process? You guys weren't. No one asked us, or no one asked the employer, or no one asked maintenance, or no one asked whatever." Same thing here. And sometimes, I gotta give pushback to my industry. Sometimes HR folks, we don't show our potential value. That we tend to stay siloed, or we want to focus on more of the pay or the more, again, administrative, tactical stuff. But I know we're producing 30 to 40 master's level students, probably 30 to 50 undergrad students who's going into the workplace knowing that we are here to help the organization go forward. Getting off a little track here, but silver lining in a very gray cloud is COVID. I think COVID did a lot for HR as a whole. A lot of HR professionals didn't take advantage of it because before it was, I think my generation worked really hard to get senior leaders to just listen to us and invite us. We'll let you play in our sandbox. But COVID hit, and many of these folks had no clue what to do. Remote, not remote. We're getting people leaving left and right. Do we furlough? We don't. And figuratively, we had a lot of deer in the headlights looks from senior leaders saying, we don't know. And numerous HR leaders, they stood up and they helped them out, and that helped a lot. And I think that, not I think, I know the same thing is going to happen with technology and AI. We're going to see, we're already seeing research already. You're going to, again, because think about what you're hearing: reskilling, repurposing. Um, what do we do with this extra hours? You need HR's input on that. That's what we deal with.
So how do we include them, and how do we set them up for success? Because maybe they get involved in a part of the process where it is just like it's a most study, and this is probably pretty painful to sit through if you're an HR partner. But like, what part of that design and kind of business continuity process are they going to be the most engageable in? And then and what do we need to do kind of from an engineering perspective to make sure that they can get in there and be successful?
Yeah, yeah. HR isn't going to help you with here's what they need to be doing. I mean, that's your guys's, but it's going to be, I think HR can tell you, hey, what do we have currently in the building, so to speak, or in the company? What don't we have? We talk about gaps a lot, performance gaps. We'll talk about let's talk about skills gap. Okay, through, and some companies are better than others, and it doesn't have to, I mean, this doesn't have to be like a dissertation or whatever. You don't have to take it too seriously. I mean, you don't have to do it too detailed, but just have a conversation. Hey, with this technology or with these changes, what new skill is needed? For something I was thinking about the other day, I keep hearing about AI training. I'm not sure how many articles, or I'll look at articles. I'm not sure how many I've seen that tell me what that looks like. Now, I know at Purdue, we are actually having an AI program, and I'm curious to look to see what classes they take. But anyway, so part of it is we can help, because again, it doesn't mean that we are the subject matter experts of the content. We are the subject matter experts of the process. We can help guide you. So where you need to involve HR is probably maybe not at the sales conversation, that when your company goes in to try to sell your services to them, but I bet you by the second or third conversation, somebody from HR needs to be involved in that. And just like, and again, just like building a house, you've got that general contractor, and I'm not going to invite the plumbers to a meeting when I'm going to talk about electrical stuff. I might need to let them know what we're doing just in case it might get, but they don't need to be in all those meetings about how many sinks are we going to have, da, da, da. Same thing with HR. Yeah, we don't need to be in all those meetings, but when it comes to design, process, helping you gather information about knowledge, skills, and abilities. When you talk about reskill, how are they going to get reskilled? Is it going to be internal? Does the organization have the resources to do the training? Do you need to maybe partner with trade organizations or other associations or with schools or whatever? Again, we're not going to be doing the training, but we can help you set up that process. We know what that should look like. And then the other thing is, and I think we talked about it at the very beginning, the number one question is, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my job? Sometimes, and I'm sure we've seen this in our previous employers, that we only think about the efficiency of, and let me kind of get into this other part that I was talking about earlier. We only think about, hey, how can we make this job most efficient, most productive? The other aspect is motivation. So I don't know if I ever did this to you, Joe, because I'm not sure if you had a lot of employees that reported to you, but I'm sure I've done it with some of the managers that we work with. And they're like, Brian, my person isn't doing well. He needs to be retrained, or she needs to get more training to do their job. And something I learned a long time ago from one of my mentors is the simple question: if you would pay that person $1 million to do that job to your satisfaction, can they do it? A lot of times they're going to go, yeah, probably. It's not a training issue. It's not an efficiency issue. It's a motivation issue. So how, I mean, again, I'm obviously biased. I come from the HR perspective, but, and so sometimes those are the problems that I saw when I was in industry. And then when I talk to some of my organizational partners and I do some consulting, maybe they only come to me with those type of issues. But a lot of times it's hey, they were doing really well last year. not sure what they're doing this year. And so we got to remember, people, when they come into the workplace, they don't take off their personal, their emotional, their psychological self. They don't take it off like a coat, hang it up on the coat rack, and then they get to work. No, they bring themselves into it. And there's hundreds, let's say thousands of conferences, sessions each year talking about psychological safety, bringing your whole self to work. What is the work-life balance? I'm hearing a lot of senior leaders, a lot of these high-level folks talking about it, but let's see if they really believe it and they walk the talk. If they don't bring HR in to help them look at the change management or the motivational factors in changing it, it's just lip service.
Very interesting. Yeah, I've noticed a couple of things. This is an interesting motivation anecdote, but we've designed several workstations, right, and new processes, and sometimes people they're very adamant about bidding into those jobs because we've done such a good job like designing, and this is kind of by happenstance, right? We've designed an excellent place to work, and they're very motivated, and it's a very clear job. People love doing it, and then they bid out of all the other jobs that support that, and that becomes a problem. And sometimes you design a system or a process, and nobody wants to do that work, right? Maybe it's extremely technical, or it's like a new maintenance position where you have to know controls coding, right? Like these are we've designed this job, and now somebody's got to fill this position, and nobody is really ready for that. And I think it's kind of the both sides of that coin when you automate, right? And typically there's not an HR professional involved in that design process. It's, sometimes we get lucky, sometimes we don't, is what it feels like. But I think to your point, it's a lot more about being deliberate in that inclusion. And then that additional design step really is like what it sounds like.
Well, and you brought something up that we haven't talked about yet. And I've thought about it a little bit. But when we try to decide what jobs to give over to technology, a lot of times we think of what are those specialized, quick things that technology does. What about those jobs that nobody wants to do?
Yeah.
And I think in many jobs, that's where stuff or technology AI is going to help. I know for me, I absolutely hate grading. So I am looking all over the place where I can get.
You're ready for AI.
I'm ready for AI to say, hey, I know how Dr. Chupp grades the papers and they do it. But I to a certain extent, and this is how we get people to embrace this. So again, your company, I'm assuming your company comes in and there's this planned change, there's this maybe a wholesale change, a large change. But we also need to talk to organizations, even inside those organizations, about those incremental changes, those individual changes, and how do we get people to embrace? I mean, if I wasn't in this field or thinking about this, and if somebody said, "Hey, Brian, what if I could help you out that you really don't have to spend 15 hours a week grading? How about if I can cut that down to 3?" I'm going to go, sign me up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the approach we need to take. Instead of making AI the boogeyman or whatever, we need to say, my gosh, look how much. And again, from an organizational perspective, I get it. We got to think about productivity, efficiency, because it's about the bottom line. There's nothing wrong with bottom line. And so, but if that's the only thing that we use, or the only marketing pitch we use, I'm not sure how many employees we're going to get. Maybe the committed, the high ones, the ones that have like profit sharing in there. But if we can also approach them and say, what if I can make your job easier? What if I can take away some of that stuff? Let's do it. Now we got to remember part 2 is we got to also help them replace the task. What are they going to do if they don't have to do those things anymore? And you mentioned this is change management 101. Again, does HR the only one that can do it? Change management? No, of course not. But again, people what we know. We're the subject matter experts on organizational behavior and individual behavior, right? That's what basically HR should be. And we don't have time to go into it, and your audience probably would care less about, okay, the job characteristics model. what would be some things that you would need to build in? You mentioned, what about these jobs that people don't want to do? Yeah, in a perfect world, we'd have technology do it. We'd have some robot do it, but you can't do that. And so you're going to have, we have jobs. There's always jobs where nobody wants, and that's the one you're always trying to fill. You've got to think outside the box to say, okay, is there anything special that we can give to that? Is there anything that we can do to artificially increase motivation? It might not be anything that you can build into that job, but maybe you can give some other type of benefits, whether it's flexibility, money. I don't know what it would be.
That's almost like HR leading the kind of automation charge in an organization, right? Like that's kind of an interesting concept. It's not something I often see, but you can automate anything with enough time and money, right? That's sort of the story we tell. But we don't choose to. We choose to automate a certain set of things you can't do, and things that makes a lot of money immediately if you do. Like those are kind of the two big ones. But there's things that you should automate, and I think it's probably not clear to a lot of ops leaders. Maybe it's more clear to human resource partners what those are. That's a really interesting approach to automation.
Yeah, and of course I'm biased, right? I'm a Ph.D. in HR, been in this field for 30 years, teaching people for 10 years. But I'm going to say, all right, I'm not going to go over the top and say HR should lead or what. I get it. Mm-hmm. But come on. We can be in the front seat, or we can at least be in the second row of seats to it, because it's all about partnerships. That's the first class that my students take, my master's level students take, is HR strategy. And the first lesson I give, actually, this is the first lesson I give in any HR course, graduate or undergraduate. It's not about HR. It's about the business. HR is going to help the business be successful. So don't start designing, don't start measuring things that is only focused on HR. Let's focus on the business. But oh my gosh, I think again, if you have a good HR team, good HR professional, good HR consultant or whatever, they can help guide you down this road. You said it, Joe. You don't know what you don't know. There's and one of the things that, again, I've been thinking about and I teach about is, if you think about this I'm not sure if it's the last, but one of the large technological change from the 1800s, 1900s, horse and buggy to the car. Yeah, if you look at the beginning of that change to the end of that change, that was pretty large, of industries going bye-bye, being sunsetted, and industries and companies coming. But that took what? A couple of decades, 3 or 4 decades to do it?
Yeah.
Experts are saying this is going to happen in 5-10 years.
Yeah, so fundamental change happening that fast is pretty wild.
And this is a fundamental change too, because it's not necessarily we're going to get rid of this job. It's how are we going to redo this job and so forth. And organizations don't have, their stockholders are not going to allow them to make mistake, try a little bit better, make a mistake, try a little bit better. Oh, we'll do it next year and so forth. They're going to expect boom, boom, boom. So it's in their best interest to get a lot of different folks, not just HR, but you got to get a lot of different folks who aren't usually in that room. You got to get them in that room, because we can go, whoa, 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 whoa. That's probably not going to work. And so to anybody out there, and I don't know if I ever shared this with you, is one of the tools that I learned early on from one of my mentors is what we call options and outcomes. And so if there's any non-authority people out there saying, okay, Dr. Chupp, how can I deal with somebody who I don't have authority over? So in HR, we have to lead without authority. A lot of folks like that. And so options and outcomes. So what you just say is, hey, that's an option. Here's probably going to be the outcome. I know what I'm talking about. No. And then they figure out, oh, Brian does know what he's talking about. And so I always say, your gut. So at first, manager or an organization will make a decision, and as an HR person, I don't hear about it until an employee complains. Okay. Then the next level is, oh, hey, Brian, I forgot to tell you, yesterday I made this change. I just want you know. And then the next one is, hey, Brian, I'm going to make this change. And then, hey, Brian, I'm thinking about making this change. What do you think? And then the next one, you're really there, is, Brian, here's the results I want to get. How do you think I should get there? Through my people. And so in these meetings, I mean, again, as an HR person, maybe we're down in the pecking order a little bit, but we're going to go, you could do that, but here's what we think is going to happen. And
yeah. I think design sessions with like uncommon perspectives tend to yield some pretty excellent results, right?
Exactly.
In my experience.
Yeah.
Whether or not we know what those perspectives we need to add to it are, like clearly, like, we can do some more work there. But I think it's an excellent point.
Well, and going back to the team, I mean, everybody does teams, and if you look at the literature, the reason why companies love doing teams or doing a team approach is, we get all these different perspectives, we get this stuff. But the research also, now I haven't looked at it in the last 4 or 5 years, so I'm not sure if something happened with COVID. This was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
But the research also showed that in many cases, the majority of the time, a team talks about common believed or things that people have in common, because that's just human nature. I mean, there are some people who are just, they like to be idiots. I don't know what word. They like to be difficult.
Yeah.
But and so I tell some of my clients or some of my managers are like, why do we have all these different perspectives if we all want to talk about what we all agree on? Don't we want different perspectives? To your point, we want different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So if you're making a change, if you're making some type of a change, why get everybody who thinks similar to you in terms of what they know, their education, their experience? Why would you want all of those people in the same room? If you have 10 people, you probably only need 2 of those folks, right? Why? Yeah. What? Yeah. How much help was that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th person? They're going to go, yep, you're right. Yep, you're right. You're right. Oh, yeah, you're right. You need people who are going to go, you got to think about it from something else, from a different perspective. And that's just good leadership. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's earth shattering. Most of the stuff that I teach, it might have new names. It might have fancy buzzwords. A lot of it you read in stuff from the 1940s, 1950s. People are people. And some companies don't care. Some companies talk but don't do the walk. And then there's some really good companies that are walking the walk.
Well, it's good to hear that there's folks out there really doing it.
Yeah, and there's. I mean, I've got lots of organizational partners that I won't say who it was, but there's one organization. I was at a meeting and they were talking about some strategic planning, and so I was there because they were looking to see if Purdue could help out with some of our group, some engineering folks were going to go and do some help and so forth. But anyway, the person who facilitated the session was the senior VP of HR. And I'm like, yes, that company gets it. And again, I'm not saying there's anything special, but it was just nice to see that they had that much confidence in the HR person because, again, she wasn't the expert in each of the areas, but she could bring things together. She knew where resources, she knew where strategy, she knew all of that. And
she understood the human resources.
Yes, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe it is a good title.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm a professor. I could teach. I could talk all day. But the other thing is, we talk about human capital and social capital, and again, there's a lot of different definitions. But not only is it people that are important, and there's a big debate on: is it only people, or is it systems and processes and networking and all those in between kind of those connections? That's important too. And I'm not saying HR is the only one that can do that, but the organization not only needs to figure out the ends, the different data points, so not data points, but the different individuals, but how do these resources, human or not, how do they connect? But I think sometimes we just one of the things I'm concerned about is, again, we love to do things without thinking a lot, and I think with how quickly technology is going to change, I think people are going to use that as an excuse, saying, "Oh, we don't have time to do that." So I've been reading up, and I use a lot of agile principles. Not that I'm an expert in it, but I just pick out bits and pieces and say, "Hey, yeah, we don't have to have everything done." I mean, again, what's their one of their most common terms is start with the least the lowest level that you can implement or something like that.
Yeah.
And then make some adjustments along the way. There's a certain phrase that they use.
Minimum viable product.
Yeah, probably something like that.
MVP.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So I'll just do one more question here for you.
Okay.
But and maybe you can't talk about exactly who it is, but can you kind of give me a story about a real world example of a company that is doing this right? Like, what did they do that was excellent, and then what was their outcome?
I'm not sure if there's anybody. I don't know if there's an outcome yet, Joe.
Oh, really?
I mean, outcomes who've done technology, but if we want to get into like AI, Gen AI, even your large companies like maybe I shouldn't use that. I went to a conference and some of their top folks talked, and those tech companies tend to be the first ones. They're the first movers, right? They're on the front end of that exchange thing. And they're saying we're still trying to figure it out. And but I think what companies have figured out is you got to have some common understanding of expectations. So again, this might not be answering your question because I'm not sure if I heard of anybody that say, "Oh, hey, here's our case study," because I tend to operate in the scholarly world, which it takes about 4 years for research to happen and for it to get published. There's a bunch of white papers out there that saying, "Hey, we do it well." I don't know if that's true or not, but there are companies who are on the right track, and so it sounds like the lessons that they've learned that I've heard and talked to people about is there has to be a conversation about what's acceptable, what not acceptable. And especially, I go back to a previous point where a lot of organizations and even smaller organizations, they're going to see this as I'm not sure if the word is iterative, or they're going to see this as kind of a little bit at a time.
Yeah, iterative process.
Iterative process. And oftentimes it's going to be individuals. Some podcast I listened to last week, they said that they think like what's going to happen in 2024 or 2025, last half of 2024 and early part of 2025. And this person from one of those large companies said, we think where you're going to see the most movement is individuals figuring out how AI can help them out. So it's going to be the employee themselves figuring it out. Now, that doesn't mean that the organization says, okay, because there has to be some guidelines, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And in the academic world, let me speak the academic world, obviously it's, oh my gosh, Gen AI, Chat GPT is going to write papers for the students don't have to write papers anymore, and they're going to do that, we can't let that happen. Well, what I like about Purdue is they've taken on a very different perspective, probably somebody just when calculators came out, is that let's not fight it, let's embrace it. And so I went through numerous trainings last summer saying, hey, how can you use this to your advantage? It might mean that you need to change what you're going to assess. And the best story I love telling my students is like, I went to one of those sessions. And so I sometimes I get case studies from like Harvard Business Review or somewhere else, but sometimes I create my own one. Our previous company, I've kind of created some one that was kind of like that. Not that I use their name. And so I just said, okay, I'll try it. So I threw that case study, the scenario questions into ChatGPT, and I gave it some criteria, and it printed out 15 seconds later, 20 seconds later, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is oh, why didn't I think of that? And so I was like, wait a minute. I would be a hypocrite if I said my students couldn't use ChatGPT, even though I, as the professor, am using ChatGPT. So I'm a professor. It takes me forever to get to my point, but my point is, I had to create principles and guidelines. So that's the word there: principles, guidelines, and so forth. And so in my class, I said, hey, ChatGPT, I'm okay if you use it, but you got to act like it's a source. It's just another source, just like if you read an article or whatever. So you got to cite it.
Yep.
And you just can't copy and paste. And you can only use it for maybe 15% of your paper or something like that. But the other thing, and this is kind of connecting back to what we were talking about before, where I think that where it's really going to help us, but we got to embrace it, is I'm going to have to change my assessments. What am I assessing? So and so I always like to say the what, the so what, and the now what. And in the undergrad world, we deal a lot with the what concepts and so forth. And then, okay, what's important about this? And then what do you do? How I'm embracing this is I'm allowing technology, ChatGPT, to help the student with the what. I'm not going to assess them on it. It might be just a completion type of assignment. But now I can spend more time on the so what and the now what. Yeah. So just like that, I think organizations have to have that mindset. Again, you got to have that mindset. It's a totally different way of thinking about it. One, you're not going to think about it if you're constantly doing urgent and important. If you're going back to that Covey matrix, if your whole world is basically putting out fires, you're not going to think like this. And so when you do, invite HR, please.
I think it's a super interesting point. And this is like an old Toyota thing. It's called automation. So when you design something, you design the machine to do what the machine is really, really good at. Yeah. And then you design the person's part of their job to do what people are really, really good at. And that line like shifts over time, of course, right? But with AI, your description with your students, and maybe for like, especially like I've done some research into engineering workflows. Yeah. Like there are things that people are still good at, and you got to figure out what those are, and you got to figure out what the AI is good at, because it's not actually good at everything. Right. And that line's going to shift over time. And I think finding that balance and designing like your workflows and processes accordingly is probably going to be one of the key skills, right? Like figuring out where that is.
Oh, yeah. Again, going back to AI is not going to take your job. Someone who works with AI is going to take your job. It's that new skill set. Yep. And as I mentioned, I think universities are going to play a bigger part. You're going to see other organizations, your industry and so forth, trying to see what that new skill set is. Do you have time for me to ask you a question?
Sure. Yeah, I got time.
So, I mean, you've worked with me. You know what HR? I've kind of talked a lot about how great HR is and what HR. How can HR do a better job in helping organizations make these transformational changes due to technology?
Well, I think you sort of hit. So HR like does sit in the background or like in a silo, and not all, in my experience is different than everybody's, but not all HR leaders are trying to get into those meetings, right? Like, and I think you had an excellent example. Like they've kind of worked their way up that call list, right? Like, are you the first person I talk to when I make a change? Or are you the last person I talk to? And so if there was more HR folks that kind of thought that way, they want to be like in there, they want to be the ones that are helping push innovation forward instead of, sometimes they appear to like stop innovation. And that makes all the ops and engineering folks panic, right? I definitely don't want to stop moving forward as fast as possible. So yeah, I think working their way up that ladder would be probably like the most important step. Like once you get your seat at the table, like everyone's there to listen, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and because we've got to understand, unless we're an HR consulting firm, HR is not the business of the business. What you guys are doing is the business of the organization, business. And I remember we've kind of chatted offline about success stories and not so much success stories at our previous employer.
Everybody
And
has both. I don't know which
yeah,
ones you
yeah,
talk about.
yeah. So, but I remember one of I think it was an RVP. He's one of the RVPs. He came into our facility to have a walk, and so it just for some reason it was just him and I walking, and he stopped and he said, "Brian, you're different." So I'm like, okay, where is this going?
Please provide context.
He said, "You're not like all the other HR folks." I'm like, okay. He's like, "You get us. You try to get us." And what that means is I try to understand the organization. The other thing is one of our assistant managers, I don't know if I ever told you this story, that I had been there for maybe a year or so, and middle of a shift, I was out in a department just watching, and I might have even had my laptop out there doing my work at a workstation, staying up. But somehow I must have been getting involved a little bit. And he's like, "Ryan, what are you doing out here?" "Oh, I'm nothing." He said, "Is there anything wrong?" I'm like, "No, I'm just observing, just trying." "Why are you doing this?" So here I was trying to do the right thing, and
Real
he was like,
suspicious.
"Yeah," he was like, "Oh, HR is out here." But again, like you said, you have to earn the right. Maybe that's again, I have all these adages here, but we've got to earn the right for you guys, for the operation folks, to listen to us.
Yeah.
So
I think maybe a good perspective on that is like would you like pull the engineering manager into an HR meeting?
that's a
Right? Like they would have to earn your trust to be in that particular conversation because it's clearly not like a normal thing in their wheelhouse, right?
That's brilliant, Joe. That's brilliant because
Write that down. Joe said something brilliant.
Joe said something brilliant because one, I think it would be very helpful. Number two is, what is it? Scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, or whatever. Is that
Yeah.
if we lead by example, again, HR folks, we can lead, we can do things without that authority. So if we involve operation folks into some of our decision making, so it's not behind the scenes when we do our comps or whatever,
Yep.
it's a hey, we're thinking about maybe implementing this initiative, employee initiative, or whatever. How do you think it's going to affect operations? How do you think it's going to affect finance? Hey, we're thinking about doing this training. We need some maybe technology. Hey, IT folks, how could you help us do this? You're absolutely correct.
Absolutely. No, great question. Very thought provoking.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah, it goes both ways. And we'll see what happens. I'm really I'm really excited. It's interesting. Somebody with one of our recruiters for the undergrads came by today and said, "Hey, I had a parent and a child visit. They're thinking about coming to Purdue to the business school." And so this recruiter was talking about all the different majors, and he mentioned something about HR, and he's like, "HR, is that even a thing? Isn't that going away? Thousands of jobs are being laid off." And well, first of all, I just started laughing, and I'm like, no. Do I think there's a lot of job eliminations happening in HR? Oh yeah, but just like everywhere else on the administration side. And I don't know if this is going to be a net increase or a decrease in the field of HR with once all the stuff, all the dust settles, so to speak. But I envy my students. Man, it is a. I don't know if we want to finish with this because this is not an HR podcast, right? But
Yeah.
this is a great time to be in HR.
I mean, it's kind of an exciting new world, right? Like a whole bunch of stuff is like clearly going to change very, very quickly. And they're about to step right in there, right?
Yep. And we can't be arrogant to say, "Oh, we know everything." We have our place. Let's use it. Let's do it. And uh, we need all hands on deck, right? So we need all areas on deck in these planning sessions.
Very cool. Well, Brian, thank you very much for your time today. I think
My
this is
pleasure.
a very interesting conversation. It's the type of conversation we don't often get to have. Just sitting in AutoCAD all day. But I think it's super, super important. And I'm very pleased you took the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure. I am unabashedly a proponent of HR. I'm one of the biggest cheerleaders of HR, but not because of HR. I'm a proponent of success in business, organizational success, and HR has to make difficult decisions. There's many conversations I've had that were tough conversations, and I made lots of mistakes, but again, it's a conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you again. You're setting the stage by inviting an HR person to be one of these folks to come and talk. We need more of it.
Very cool. All right. Well, I'll see you next time, Brian. And
okay.
I appreciate your time, man.
All right. Thanks, Joe.